Hey, RC.
Hey, Aaron, how's it going?
I'm great. I am ready today to talk bikes.
I know because you actually cycled here, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
In the rain.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it wasn't as rainy as I thought it would be, and I had those huge parachute rain pants, but better safe than sorry.
Well, we've got an impressive cyclist and writer on the show today. His name is Martin Bauman. He's a writer, podcaster, and the award-winning author of Hell of a Ride, recently published by Pottersfield Press. As a broadcast journalist, his work has been featured on air in Canada and beyond. He has written for numerous outlets, including the Globe and Mail and the Calgary Herald. In addition to his writing, he's also passionate about mental health. In the summer of 2016, Bauman cycled across Canada to raise funds for mental health initiatives across the country and in his home of Waterloo Region. And he continues to speak publicly about the importance of community mental health resources.
Okay, right on. Let's talk cycling and writing. Hey, Martin, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Been looking forward to this.
Right on. Yeah, me too. First thing I jotted down in my notes here was I loved your short sentences.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm just wondering how that developed.
I really had to work on those for a while.
Okay.
That was not a first draft. That probably wasn't even a second or a third draft thing.
Yeah.
Because when I initially was writing this book, call it Draft 1 2017, I had recently read Shantaram. And those are like beautiful, long, flowy sentences, and that was what I was trying to emulate at the time. And I think it took a while. It took joining an MFA program, and it also took reading authors to understand the power of brevity. Mm-hmm. And I think some of that was trying to think about what would actually reflect my mind state at the time, both going way back to think about sort of the psychology of being, early 20s and struggling mentally, and also what it felt like to be on a bike ride and the kind of mindset that was every day. And yeah, I guess I was trying to just echo that, and through revision, it came. At the risk of blathering on for too much, it's like, how Rick Rubin, the music producer, has talked about how his work isn't really to produce a record, it's actually to reduce and to kind of strip away everything that isn't the song or the record to get to what it actually should be. That's maybe the process that this book went through over many, many hours of sweat and tears and killing your darlings.
Yeah, and that lines up really well, I think, with the idea behind the bike journey and what you were thinking about on the road, and that was distilling everything down to just the essentials. Mm-hmm. And just as a quick overview, you cycled from the west to the east, crossing Canada, which is an epic journey. So you're saying that biking and writing have a similar vibe?
I think there's some struggle involved in both. There's definitely days when it's flowing and you're feeling good. The wind is behind you. You're inspired. The words are just pouring out of your fingertips onto the keyboard or out of the pen. And there's other days when you're pushing into headwinds and you're pedaling like hell and you're getting nowhere. So yeah, I think there's definitely parallels.
Nice.
And then going back to talking about starting in one place with the longer sentences and sort of the long process from first draft to final draft, you wrote the draft sort of as you were writing. What did you keep with you for?
Yeah, so I had a notebook, a classic tiny spiral-bound notebook, the kind of thing you might have had as like a school agenda. And I was just keeping a very kind of rudimentary daily journal at the time. Not really more than a page per day, which I thought was going to be really useful when I was going to be going back and writing this book. And it was to an extent, but it often wasn't the kind of stuff that helped at all. I think I had this idea going into it, and it's a challenging too, because I did do this bike ride knowing that I might want to write about it and it might become the basis for a book. And that creates its own sort of challenge of how do you go into a venture. I'm sure you face the same.
Same exact idea.
And it's not, the stuff that I wrote down is not the stuff that was actually the most interesting. I thought it was going to be all about the sites that I saw, and really what I neglected to document the most were the people I met. Where the true kind of characters and interests lie, and that took combing over recollections. Instead of, I didn't have photographs to look back on. I didn't have the sorts of deep, long conversations. I had to kind of pull that out of the subconsciousness.
For whatever reason, it seems like it's always hard to document in the middle of something like that, right? You're always like, oh, it'll be fine, or it'll work out later, or this isn't interesting.
Yeah, and you don't always know what's going to be important or what sorts of themes are going to reveal themselves to you over time. I think I thought initially it was going to be more of a straightforward adventure tale, and that the adventure was going to be gripping enough to maintain a reader's interest throughout. And I think what I ended up with, and I think it had no other way but to go this way, because it was the story I needed to tell, was much more of an inner monologue of how this bike ride fit into my life and how it spoke to me about being a young man, 20, 22, 23 years old, and the sorts of that sort of tug of war of independence, and how do you both kind of have a place that you want to leave but also feel pulled back to, all those kinds of really complicated things. Is a different story from just an A to B of Vancouver to St. John's. That took reflection, and it took other peers reading and helpfully guiding me in the right direction. I think I have to give a lot of credit to my supervisor, Deborah Campbell, for helping to shape this manuscript into what it became. She's such a great journalist as well as reporter, and she wrote a beautiful book, A Disappearance in Damascus. Very different subject matter, but she knows how to merge reporting with storytelling, and that's what I was certainly seeking in part to do with this book, interviewing people, subject matter experts on psychology, on depression, and be able to fit that in a way that didn't feel shoehorned.
Yeah, so I think this is such an honest book, and that's what my question to you is, did you have that word on your wall as you were writing it, be honest? And then when in the process did you say, I really want to tell a lot of stories from my own past here?
Yeah, if it wasn't literally on the wall, it was certainly in my mind throughout. And I think I credit a number of books for that. I read, as many others have read and loved, Cheryl Strayed's Wild. I thought that was such a beautiful and honest book as well. Really peels back a lot of layers of not just being an adventure tale, which it is, but also a very personal tale of overcoming and of personal struggle. Another book, Welcome to the Goddamn Ice Cube by Blair Braverman, about sort of the North. It's really about the North. Blair is a sled dog driver who has lived in both Alaska and Norway, and in a very male-dominated world, and is kind of talking about, safety and danger and fear, and overcoming fear in these hostile environments. And I related to both authors as I've related to others who are getting at this kind of stuff. And I think to come back to what you're getting at with the word honesty, I had a version of this book, numerous versions of this book, that did not get into abuse whatsoever. I didn't really, I think for a while I was trying as hard as I might not to write about that in the story, to write about it in a more sugar-coated way, and I just kind of kept on. The more I tried, the more the book was falling apart in my hands, and I felt like at a certain point it was just sort of the dawning that I needed to get the words out, and as I did, it felt like the rest of it made more sense, and that was really, really hard to do, tremendously difficult, but also I think necessary. And
how late in the process did that come, Martin?
Not right at the end. Certainly not right at the start either. It was probably like a third or fourth draft of things. I showed up to UVic in 2018 with a manuscript that had none of that. Was much more of the sort of the self-congratulatory adventure tale with a little bit of depression sprinkled in. And it was just kind of the next year, 2 years were a case of peeling back the onion. And part of that was, I think also, to be quite honest, the distance that being out at that program afforded me. I was both physically distant and psychologically distant enough from the abuse that I was trying to get away from or forget for many years. I had a new sort of environment to look back at that. It was also the first time that I sat in a therapist's office, and so it was kind of the freedom that the time afforded me to actually really think deeply about my life in early childhood. And to be able to write about it with some distance. Certainly in the case of a memoir, you have to, it's difficult to maintain that distance. You have to provide some immediacy, but you're also asking yourself, how much do you tell, how much do you share, and how do you share it? I didn't want to over-sensationalize things. There's the trope of writing trauma porn, and I didn't want to do that. But yeah, that was a real challenge, was how do I write a story? As I'm kind of getting around to it, I didn't feel like there were a lot of examples of books written by men who had lived through sexual abuse. They're kind of few and far between, and I didn't see examples of that, tremendously many examples of that, apart from a couple. I read a book by the name of I Am Nobody by the author Greg Gilhooly. He was a goaltender out in Winnipeg who had been coached by Graham James, as well as another book, Saga King by Antonio Michael Downing. And those were two sort of examples that I could hold on to. But apart from them, there weren't many, and so I was partly writing this book to fill what I felt like was a void, for my own sake, maybe just to work through my own feelings and hopefully come to some conclusion by the end of it, but also to add a little bit of a contribution to what still feels like a genre, if it will, or a collection of books out there that doesn't offer a lot to a boy or a young man struggling with that kind of thing.
So how did you find the reception of it within your family and friends, but then, wider readership? Did you get some surprising feedback from people?
I think for a lot of people, it came as a surprise, for sure. I mean, in the lead up to this book, I had a lot of conversations before it came out to kind of brace people,
with your family?
With family, with friends too. I didn't want it to be the first time that my immediate family or my friends were reading this about me and learning for the very first time.
Right.
For some of them, it probably was. You can only have so many conversations. After a while, it's hard to chat to everybody.
That seems like a lot of labor.
It was.
I'm sure
it was a lot.
There was a lot of. I can only imagine, but okay. I know I've had a little bit of that experience with my last book, where you're just like, I got to have this conversation eventually. Like, how much longer can I put it off? Yeah, and I was putting it off for a long, long time. It ate at me for years. I mean, the incidents I write about in the book, I hadn't really spoken about with my family in 20 years, probably, and so that was, distant ancient history for kind of the context of my family, but still felt very fresh and immediate to me. And I'm grateful that when I brought it up, it was with listening ears, and there was a whole lot of good that came from that. Really, the worst buildup, I think, is in your mind a lot of the time. You're anticipating that hard conversation. Really bracing yourself,
Yeah. And not that those conversations go fantastically every time, but I'm glad that in my case they were. It was certainly in my own mind that was far worse than the reality of the chats. But yeah, it was a whole lot of that, and so I was I guess pleasantly surprised at the reaction I got from people, certainly the people I love and care about the most.
Good.
And then it comes in unexpected places. It's not always the people that, when you write a book, it's not always the people you expect to hear from who you do, and they've picked up your book. I've had, people I met once traveling a decade ago in Italy and send me an Instagram message to say, hey, I picked up your book, and I'm going to send it on to a friend of mine.
That's cool.
Other people, classmates who maybe haven't spoken to in years who pick it up. And sometimes it's the people who you are expecting are going to read it don't read it.
Yeah.
It goes both ways.
Or don't talk about it.
Yeah. It's funny that way.
Yeah.
I would say I'm definitely going to be recommending this to people. It's one of those books that after reading it, I know I'm going to want other people to read it.
Thanks.
I have a question about swearing because I've done some cycle touring myself. Nothing anywhere in your arena, but the amount of swearing that you do while struggling on the bike.
Yeah.
Is this a phenomenon? Because I swore way more than I've ever sworn before when I've been biking.
I think so. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like the only outlet. It's like a Band-Aid or a salve that it comes out, because how else can you contextualize or deal with pissing rain or the bugs as you've experienced, black flies, mosquitoes as you're in southwestern Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
I dealt with horse flies. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast or not. I dealt with a lot of horse flies in Ontario and Manitoba. And
I was horrified that you couldn't out-pedal them sometimes, because I was always under the impression that you would be going fast enough to leave them behind.
Yeah, and maybe had I not had my two heavy panniers on the back of my bike, maybe I would have been faster. But I was loaded down with like 80 pounds of gear, certainly what felt like 80 pounds of gear, and you really don't move too fast.
Yeah,
in that sort of rigging, unless you're blessed with the best headwinds, and I wasn't always, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Actually, this is kind of for you as well, Ryan. Is you did two bike trips, and neither were as quite as long as Martin's, but
No.
You took notes on the first one, and then you also obviously took lots of notes on the second one. What did you change the second time around for your note-taking?
I just wrote a lot more because I wasn't traveling such large distances.
Okay.
I would take some time to write narrative, and I tried to write scenes and describe places, knowing that I might need them later on.
Yeah.
And to your point, Martin, about writing about people you meet, this time I tried to capture, the essence of people and put it down so that I could catch it later.
Yeah.
Also, I took a lot of photographs. And then the third thing is that I started writing right when I got back. So I didn't have the distance from it, which may or may not, be a benefit to it. But so I was a bit more purposeful with narrative notes.
Yeah, I could only see you would want to really ramp up that aspect of a trip if you're doing it again. I'm sure you would do the same, right?
For sure, yeah. At the risk of hijacking the conversation, how much of what you wrote down the day of ended up being kind of final copy? Was it?
No, very little.
Yeah.
Very little. But if I were trying to conjure a place, I would look back at the notes from there and maybe use some of the phrases I used to describe trees or, sunsets, other things like that.
Yeah. The kind of descriptory stuff sticks more. Because you've done the same, right? With the last logging show, you're talking about conversations that are potentially years old. It was easier in a way because I wasn't loaded down with a bike or anything. I could just go and sit in a truck whenever I wanted and write down a bunch of stuff. So I wrote very, very heavily in the moment. Yeah. I would probably take almost 1,000 words worth of notes per day out there, kind of thing. But I do really relate to when I was writing the firefighting book. Every night after work, I would take notes, and I was so disappointed at how little of it was useful by the time I looked at it. I thought I was doing this great work, and I guess that's, you are going and you are keeping a record of it, and so that's, you can't beat yourself up too much about that. But it was disappointing. How little was useful. I was curious, Martin. You're kind of a, and I was just reading the part where you and your dad meet up in Northern Ontario.
And it's so great to dip back into again. Like Ryan says, it's so like awesomely ambitious. This book, like there's so many different threads and stuff. But I found it interesting. You're talking about you and your dad being sort of two reserved guys.
Yeah.
Yet your day job, you're a journalist. You work for the Coast. How do you sort of square that sort of instinct to be, less talkative and effusive with the fact that your job requires a bit of that for you?
It's taken a lot of work, I think, and it is a weird personality quirk. I think I wouldn't say I'm extroverted by nature. I probably would say I'm more introverted, but I do love stories and I love people. I love to hear people's stories. I think for me, how it kind of fits into my line of work is, and in the writing of this book too, I've always been much more comfortable writing about other people than myself. It was the biggest challenge for me in taking on a memoir was to look inward, to turn that lens that I was so used to doing about other people, and maybe in part that's sort of a deflection mechanism, is to write about somebody else, or to think, as a journalist, you're often anyway writing kind of from the margins or from a distance, from this supposed imaginary impartial perch where you're kind of in the thick of things, but you're above the fray.
Yeah.
And that kind of suited how I felt I existed in the world. Was, there was always a layer of myself that I kept to me, and
which had to be cracked open in the
because I think you could try and write a book, but it wouldn't land with a person. It wouldn't feel honest. I think you can probably tell when. I know I can tell. I've read books where I feel like the author's holding something back, and not that they owe it to me to spill their guts on everything. There's certainly, everybody makes a choice about what they share in a book, but I think the most interesting books come from asking those sorts of questions of yourself when it's appropriate, or when it demands it. I don't really know any other way to think about it than that, I guess.
I've got another question about Dave's. So because I read that in your book, and for context, Martin, you meet lots of people named Dave, and they're all really helpful, nice guys. And I met 3 or 4 Daves in my first journey as well. So what is it with Daves, do you think?
I don't know if it's just the mantle. It's like when you're named a Dave, you become this sort of angelic person. Was the sailboat guy a Dave in your book? I can't remember his name.
No,
anymore.
He wasn't. But
no, okay,
the Lewisburg story, that's where I met 3 really important people named Dave, who were really helpful and generous.
So if you want the world to be a better place, name your kid Dave.
Yeah.
You missed the boat on that. Martin had his first in May, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, thanks. I won't say his name on the podcast. I'm trying to keep his life private, but he is not a Dave. We can rule that one name off the list. Except, to be honest, for me personally, there's a lot of significance because my grandpa, my dad's dad, was named David, and it's my middle name. And it's my son's middle name actually too, because of the fact I can't help but think back on it. I wasn't astoundingly close with my grandpa. He was a lot older than I was. Obviously, he was a lot older than I was, but he was a lot
even
older.
by grandpa standards.
When I was a kid, he felt old compared to my opa, my mom's dad, because there was an age gap there. But I can't help but ask myself if he wasn't on that bike ride with me in all these various Daves along the way, who showed up at just when I needed them.
Amazing.
Did you find yourself becoming more spiritual as the ride progressed?
I think I'm always interested in signs and drawing meaning from things, and I think if it wasn't spirituality, and it was also just a real faith in humanity that is easy to be chipped away at and eroded over time, especially when you live your life online, as it's easy to do as a journalist. The discourse is always about how we're crumbling and falling apart, and maybe that's certainly a concern, and it feels like we're fractured often. But I get out there and I meet people all across the country, and it's a wonderful reminder that a lot of people are very decent and charitable and giving. And maybe I just ran into the right people, but I would rather choose to believe that most people are inherently good and caring than the opposite.
So do you feel like blind trust or trust is an important thing to offer to the world?
I think so. I think it can be a dangerous way to live, or maybe you're taught at times it's a dangerous way to live. I would rather be. I think I would rather be let down, though, placing trust in people to do the right thing and it not coming true, than to expect that everybody's going to double cross me or expect that everything is going to conspire against me.
Yes,
that feels like its own dangerous way to live. And maybe you're protected at times or feel like you're protected from being fooled, but is that really have you really won in the end if that's kind of the lens through which you're seeing the world?
Yeah.
You just started back at your day job. Yeah. This week, correct?
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how that's going post baby and what sort of shifted in the past 6 months.
Well, the biggest shift certainly has
besides
been
everything.
besides everything. Yeah. It's in terms of what's changed. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. I certainly think there's an appreciation for a whole other way of living now. I certainly empathize with parents. I understand their struggles, and it's gotten me more outside of myself. Yeah. And the kind of constant me narrative, that's still a strong one and hard to put down. But I think it has forced me to, being a parent. I can't dwell on me and my what I think are needs or my wants all the time, because there is a living being that would not survive without me intervening and helping at all times. Yeah. And just the miracles of all that too, My kid got really sick after he was born, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. He needed to be readmitted into hospital for 10 days, and the worry and anxiety that came with that. This kid who you've just met, who's so fresh into the world, and suddenly you're back at the hospital again when you don't expect to be. That really changes your perspective, and you realize kind of what a miracle it is that he's healthy and not just fighting but thriving, and it's so cool to see him learn things on his own. And if it's true that you're not, even when as a writer, not writing is also writing, just living in the world, existing.
You got to lean on that hard sometimes.
Is writing, yeah. I think it's definitely a whole lot of it's like a fire hose of intake right now of new life experience to think about and reflect on.
I was gonna bring it back to. I'm always bringing it back somewhere. You notice?
Bring it on back.
No, I was going to ask a little bit more about the making of Hell of a Ride.
Yeah,
Martin. Any sort of particular things that stick out through the process? You've talked a bit about your time at UVic and the MFA, sort of refining it, and then after that, what happened?
After it was the journey of getting the thing published. It was, you have this manuscript, you think it's ready for the world, and you're just trying to find anybody who agrees with you. First, that was agents for a while. Conversations with agents that felt like they were getting somewhere, and then didn't quite pan out for one reason or another. Often because, having a book and having a published book. Usually, there's certainly luck involved, and there's also the financial component. Somebody has to decide this is going to make some money somewhere, regardless of its artistic merit. Can I make some money off of this? Right. And so there's the question of finding a profitable audience to sell it to. And this is a very Canadian story. I know that certainly whittled away a pool of potential publishers who look for an audience beyond just Canada's borders. I'm grateful that I ended up finding Pottersfield and their Pottersfield Prize, and that they saw enough in it to want to publish it and to give me some money for it as well. But that was a whole long ordeal. That was a couple years of trial and error.
So slow.
Yeah, going from publisher to publisher, and you get rejected, and people read it, and you think you're getting somewhere. And I think it's very common. That's just kind of part of it, is the perseverance of trying on the next door until you find the right one. And I had to ask myself too, because I would get feedback, and there's a question of how much do you want to change your story to maybe align it with somebody else and how they see your story going. And I don't want to be it's a delicate balance of appreciating somebody else's perspective and incorporating it, to being willing to accept other ideas, but also holding on to what is important to you and having to make the decision, how much do I change this story that I've already spent years writing?
Yep.
And I'm glad that I was able to find a publisher who liked it for what it was, without needing to give it a whole complete surgical operation.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it went for me anyway. A whole long ordeal to get it there, but here it is.
And a little shout out to Leslie Choice. Did you chat with him a lot through this process?
Yeah, I mean, who else can I thank but him for getting this out in the world?
Yeah.
For a small independent publisher, they are a gift to an author, especially an author who's looking to get their first book out there. What a great place to end up, to be able to call home.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming in, Martin. We like to ask a question of our guests, and the question is, we're looking for some advice for someone who is trying to write potentially a book or even just writing. So do you have any baseline writing advice for those out there?
The one that immediately comes to mind, I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about, I'm sure, but I attended a workshop at the Wild Writers Festival in Waterloo, my hometown, and one of the authors there gave the advice to start late, leave early. Maybe you've heard something similar before.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to, if you're in a scene, get right to the action. You don't have to, your day doesn't have to start with you waking up in bed and getting out of bed. It can start with the interesting thing that's going on.
Yeah.
And so, how did I apply that into my book? Well, for me, it was, I want to get people right into the worst storm possible on the ride. And then when they're invested enough, step back to kind of tell the story from the start.
Yep.
I think it's proven helpful to when I'm stuck on a scene, is to try and reflect on what's actually the most critical part of the scene and kind of cut the extraneous bits. And I think it's just a good principle to follow.
Nice.
And I could see that in action in the book, Martin, because you do have very separate threads, and it's like like you sort of leave hanging at one, and then you talk a bit about your past, and then suddenly we're back on the Trans-Canada.
It's a hell of a ride, and it's a perfect title because it is. That's the reading of it.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Is a hell of a ride.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that.
And good work designing it all yourself too.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's beautiful looking.
I appreciate that. Yeah. That's the trick of the trade is it's not two photos. Well, it is two photos. It's not one actual photo. One of these photos I took, which was the backdrop of the mountains, and the other is a photo a friend of mine took of me, same ride, my friend Nathan, who joined me in Ontario, of me on the bike. And
so that's Ontario pavement and BC mountains, Alberta mountains?
That's Ontario, Martin, and BC mountains. The pavement is all BC. The shadow is Ontario.
Oh, I see.
It works.
Yeah, really nice.
Nobody can see this, but check it out. Hell of a ride.
Yeah.
Okay, right on. Thanks
guys.
Martin.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, really fun.
Awesome. Further Reading is produced by the University of King's College MFA program, overseen by the great Gillian Turnbull. I edit it, Aaron Williams, that's me. Music is by Pete Johnson. Graphics are by Mike Smith. On the other side of the room from me is
R.C. Shaw over here.
Thanks a lot. We'll talk again soon.